Krishna. I'm here to talk to you about why everything is an A/B test at Pinterest. It's a little bit of like a philosophy, how we treat data and how we use data to make decisions at Pinterest, and some of the stories around like what experiments have worked and what have we learned doing experimentation at Pinterest. So start with like why experiments are important at Pinterest. It turns out like the product itself is actually enabling creativity among our users. It's basically like it is about like what our users aspire to do in the future, the trips that they want to take, or the recipes that they want to cook, or the vacations that they want to do. In this case, these are the experiments that people are trying to do on Pinterest. So to start with, like, what is Pinterest? Pinterest is a visual bookmarking tool. We think that it allows our users to actually pin things that are interesting for them, for what they want to do in the future, and save them to relevant collections called boards. And as a result, we have this body of pins from various users, which we can use to suggest recommendations to our users. So it helps you to discover creative ideas. And then in the end, we want our users to actually go and do them in their real life. So we think that Pinterest is a data product. At the end of the day, everything that you see on the Pinterest, from like the feed that you get, recommendations, when you do a search, everything is fed by data. And essentially, we use data to both power product features, to make decisions using experimentation, to control spam, to derive insights. So at a high level, this is kind of how the data flows through the stack. We collect every interaction that our users are doing on the app. We basically log them into our queuing systems, and then all of this data goes into Amazon, which is where our infrastructure is hosted. And once the data goes into Amazon, we then crunch this data daily and produce numbers for our management to see, for engineers to sort of figure out how their features are working. And then we also use this data to feed it back into the product, so to actually improve the features or build new features. The purpose of this talk is going to be around essentially like what are the metrics that we actually are tracking at Pinterest. So some of these are actually applicable to even small startups. And how do we see like basically like growth hacking at Pinterest, right? So essentially, I'm going to focus the talk about like more around metrics that help the user growth at Pinterest, and some of the things that we do to sort of increase growth at Pinterest. So to start with, like this is broadly how we see user life cycle at Pinterest. So we acquire new users through various acquisition channels. A large amount of users come to Pinterest via SEO, like from Google, Bing. And once the user comes in, we try to push them to a sign-up flow in the hope that they get activated, right? But for us, activation means that the user actually does an action that's meaningful on Pinterest. It could be a repin or a click. So different companies have different activation. Like when I was at Twitter, they used to measure like user would come in and follow at least 5 people, out of which 2 were mutual follows. Facebook had the principle of like you come in, at least make 7 friends, then you become an active user. So for us, it's like you come in and do at least 1 repin or click. So if you actually do that, then you get into this active users bucket. And if you don't, then we track these users for a period of 28 to 35 days, and then essentially these users become dormant users. And we're constantly trying to convert these dormant users, resurrect them into active users, and as the product evolves, some of the active users may drop down into dormant users, and this whole process keeps going. So the whole process is to ensure that we are building a really nice new user experience flow and a resurrected user experience flow so that we are moving as many users as possible into the active users chunk. So some of the terminology in this talk. So some of you might be familiar with the numbers like MAUs, DAUs, and WAUs, like the monthly active users, weekly active users, daily active users. Some of the numbers that we track are specific to Pinterest around engagement. A weekly active repinner is someone who actually repins at least once a week. A weekly active click-througher is someone who at least clicks once a week. Repinner or click-througher is the same thing. And then we track this metric called 1D7 or 1RC7. What this means is within a 7-day period, a user has come to the site and actually done a meaningful action, in this case, a repin or a click-through. And this actually is the single most important number that allows us to measure activation at Pinterest. So and then we basically have built dashboards to track MAUs, like how are we moving towards our quarterly goal, what's our MAU forecast, how are we trending towards our MAUs. We then segment our MAUs by app, gender, country, different tiers of countries. And then we do this kind of accounting where we see, like, OK, within the MAUs, what are the things that are contributing to MAUs? How much are signups actually contributing to MAUs? How much are resurrections? How much is actually existing user churn and new user churn contributing to MAUs? And so, and the next thing that we look at is like acquisition metrics. As I described in that life cycle, there's acquisition, there's activation, and then there's resurrection. So for acquisition, we rely a lot on SEO. So we look at like signups by app, signups by referrer, the invites that people send once they come to the site, the unique invite senders, and invite signups. So in the activation metrics, this is the activation rate that I talked to you about. This is the total number, out of the total number of signups, how many have been converted into this 1RC7 PO. This is basically the single biggest metric. And if we try to optimize, if we actually move this metric slightly higher, this impacts the product in a huge way. And then we also track signups to what happens to signups after 35 days. So essentially, how many of these signups after 35 days have converted into weekly active users? This is a core metric for us to see the long-term engagement of the user. And then the engagement metrics that we measure are around like the ratios between different AUs, like DAOs by mouse, mouse by wows, wows by mouse. And then essentially, the number of emails that we send, open, click, notifications sent, clicked. And then finally, the resurrection metrics. These are basically the users who are dormant from 28 plus days for about 4 weeks, and then essentially who come back to the site and performed a meaningful action. So the final takeaway that we have found out is the activation is super, super important for long-term engagement. And focusing on activation, and then focusing deeply on different segments of users, how each segment by app, by country, by gender, by interest category, like where they've landed from, whether they came through a Facebook sign-up or came through a search engine optimization from Google or Bing, is very important for us to see which segment of users are actually behaving. So the second thing is, like, initially we used to compute these metrics manually. And over time, we realized that this is basically just having SQL monkeys computing these metrics. So we built automated dashboards. So one of the dashboards that I'm going to present to you is called Pinalytics, which is basically just a time series dashboard that shows, these are dummy graphs here, but basically it shows all the metrics that we care about. It computes automatically and produces these time series charts. And we found that investing in these automated tools was really, really critical to allow us to focus on things that derive new kinds of insights instead of like recomputing the same thing over and over. So this is how like Pinalytics works. It actually allows you to create new kinds of charts. A chart that is created by one person can be reusable. You can add new time series graphs to it. You can even basically, you can select different kinds of reports that other people have published. And you can do things like composition of different numbers. So let's say if you wanted to compute a ratio of 2 numbers, you can actually do that. So this was a very high leverage tool that we built and launched 6 months ago. And then in terms of A/B experimentation, there are 4 categories of A/B experiments at Pinterest. One is basically A/B testing that we do to figure out how our new features are doing. And then there are a couple of new kinds of experiments that are sort of relevant to Pinterest that I'm going to talk to you about. And then I'm going to talk to you about how we have used A/B experimentation even for infrastructure updates. So the A/B testing framework, we built this self-service tool that allows anyone to just compose a new experiment on the fly within minutes. So in this case, I could be like coming up with my own growth hack for users in Canada that are using Android. So I can specify, like, I can fill out this form. I can specify some filters. I want the control and enabled to be focusing on population of users that are within Canada that are using the Android, and essentially fill out this thing and then edit whatever ranges that I want to sort of enable this experiment for, and essentially submit this. And it basically gives me this code snippet that I can just go and copy into my code and to trigger this experiment. Once this experiment is live, then our engineers go and see this dashboard. This is the dashboard that we see to actually make decisions. On the y-axis, you see all the metrics that we care about. And on the x-axis is time. So on the y-axis, you see like daily active users, mobile daily active users, web DAOs, pin likers, pin commenters. On the x-axis, it's like each cell represents the gain or loss of the variant compared to the control on that particular day's experience. So the first cell is like the first day, aggregate first day experience of all the pinners that were exposed to the experiment. And if it's a gain, if there was a gain, then the cell is color-coded as blue. If there's a loss, the cell is color-coded as red. And if the gain is not, or gain or loss is not statistically significant, then we just leave it as gray. So for example, if you look at the repinners row, it shows that the first day experience when people interacted with this variant on Pinterest, they liked it. So there was a 2% lift in repinners. But on the second day, it was not statistically significant. Third day, it was 3%, 4%, and then it went on for a while. But after that, as it sort of went towards like 2 weeks later, it sort of dipped down. It sort of gave negative experience. So this allows us to see both the short-term and also the long-term effect of a feature change. This is more drilled down into the same dashboard, so you can click on a row and it actually shows us like actual sort of fractions of like the gains that are happening for each day, and you can also compare it with other kinds of variants that we are running along together, and also the user populations that this experiment was shown to. We also make sure that before we look at the metrics, that the experiment is set up properly, which means that we want to make sure that the control and the variant are the distribution of users is as close to random as possible. So in order to do that, we do this chi-square test, which allows us to make sure that the way we have partitioned our users in control and enabled is as close to the random as possible. And if it is not, then we abandon the experiment and retry it. So now I'm going to talk about one particular experiment that we have done in growth hacking that sort of and some of the learnings that we have got out of it. So I mean, I'm sure all of you might know about this badging. So people show this number on the app whenever you send a new push notification. So the natural impulse of every user is to sort of click on it and clear the badge, right? We expected, the hypothesis was, yeah, people will do it. And we ran an experiment, and very sort of naturally, we've seen huge gains. So the numbers went up really high, like the number of daily active users was like went up by 7%. But what we wanted to see is, like, is this going to actually cause some long-term fatigue, right? So most of the time when we are doing growth hacking, you're focused on the short-term objective improvement. So then we thought about how do we measure long-term sort of, how do we measure if our feature changes are actually affecting long-term improvement. So we started doing this thing called holdout experiment. So we ship the feature to 99% of the users, but we actually keep 1% of the users on the old experience. So this is the holdout group. So when we did that and we ran this experiment, the short-term gains were 7%, but they actually quickly dropped down to about 2 to 2.5%. Well, this is all good. Like, we still kept the feature, but it's really interesting to see that after some time that the sort of the fatigue kicked in, and essentially there was a drop in sort of engagement. So the other A/B testing category that I'm going to talk about is this copy testing. So whenever you go to any website, you see the sign-up page, and there's a text that's written on the sign-up page. It's like, OK, join Pinterest, or this is Pinterest, why don't you come and join, or whatever, right? So essentially, this is called the copy text. And we try to optimize for copy text. And it turns out that when we actually have the right kind of copy text, you can actually improve your acquisitions. And this was actually proven in one of the very well-known sort of Obama campaigns during his presidential elections. The founder of Optimizely was actually in charge of doing A/B experimentation around this thing, and his team basically ran a whole bunch of different campaigns on the look and feel of the sign-up flow. So for copy testing, the problem with using this traditional A/B testing framework that I talked to you about was we had 100 different variants that we had to test. And it was very tedious to actually run each sort of text as a new experiment. What we wanted is something that automatically converges to the optimal solution. So we built we took a new approach. We said we didn't want to make any code change. We just want to give all possible variants, and we want the system to actually converge to the optimal solution. So the solution we took was using multi-armed bandits. So multi-armed bandits is actually a solution to a famous probability theory problem. The problem is basically this. You have given a bunch of slot machines, and each one has a payoff probability. And you're asked to maximize the total payoff by selecting the right kind of slot machines to play on. So the way multi-armed bandit solves this is it basically predicts the payoff probability of each slot machine after each sort of pull. And then using that, it computes the right set of machines that you need to converge on for you to maximize the payoffs. And this is exactly what we did with copy testing. So we take all these variants, and then we converge on the small set of variants that we need that actually perform well. The third variant that I'm going to talk about, and I can talk about it before the slides come up, is, as I talked to you, the acquisition for Pinterest comes through a lot of SEO. A lot of, I'm going to switch these slides faster. Oops. So the SEO is actually a very important tool for us. But if you think about it, how do you test whether you're optimizing the pages very well for Google or Bing? You can just be sort of living in the darkness, essentially. Oops. OK. So an SEO experiment is you're changing your keyword landing pages. In our case, the keyword landing page is either the pin page or the board page that our users come in. And we want to optimize these keyword landing pages such that Google and Bing actually rank them higher. And we want to basically be able to acquire more users through that, right? Now, without doing any experiments, we have no idea to figure out what is working. So we built this SEO experimentation framework, which is where it's actually now the user population is not actually users. It's the users. The behavior that we are testing is the search engine behavior, and what we are using is the URLs to distribute between two different variants. So an example is OK, this is a keyword landing page about sort of home decor. And we may have done some improvements to optimize for Google, and then we launch the new variant and see what is the lift of the SEO traffic compared to the old ones. So for example, in this case, before the new SEO algorithm and after the new SEO algorithm, we basically see how much traffic gain or loss that we have accomplished, and over long term. And this enables us to make decisions. Should we invest more on this kind of approach or not? Right? So essentially, these are some of the different kinds of patterns. So if the SEO traffic keeps going up, keep shipping, it may drop down and maybe come back up, like ship it. If it's like doing terribly, then shut down. And if it's sort of like doing OK, so slightly higher, you then go ahead and validate what's going on. So with this, now we can answer questions like, OK, what's the impact of the new SEO feature? Well, we got this much percentage of traffic growth, right? Or is this change affecting the SEO behavior? Well, you can say like no, because we actually, when we made some changes internally recently, we did a massive security update, and without this framework, we could have lost a whole bunch of traffic from Google image search. We ran an experiment, we caught the changes early on before shipping the changes to production. So and any massive changes in SEO could actually massively hurt us in terms of user acquisition over long term. The third part I'm going to cover is that we took experimentation to the extreme level. We think that everything that you ship to users has to be an A/B experiment, and we have applied it with even our infrastructure changes. Around a couple of years ago, we rewrote our website completely. The old website was getting very clunky, and Pinterest was going to a mobile-first kind of company. So we had built a parallel sort of APIs for that our mobile clients talk to, and we had a different API for the web. So it was not like very easy to make changes to both of them. So the team basically went and built a new web framework that was modular, composable, that had a single API that would hook up to both mobile and web clients. Now, it was a massive company-wide decision. We built it, but now like there was a lot of debate, should we actually do an A/B experiment on it or not? But it turned out when we did an A/B experiment, we found out a lot of bugs. There were a lot of bugs in the functionality. There were a lot of features that were missing. So if we had not done it, it would have been very detrimental. So this was like a crucial point in the company's history where the decision-making started changing to rely more on data. So, and then another example is this library called PyAPNS. It's a library that allows us to send push notifications via Apple servers to our users. And we wanted to change it to a new open source library. We said, OK, because the new open source library was the code was really well organized, and it was like high quality code, and the engineers loved it. So OK, let's try running an A/B experiment with the new library, changing the old library, because the old library, no one was maintaining it and things like that. So it turns out like when we ran an A/B experiment, it was not at all doing well. So a lot of these decisions, when we had to invest in sort of either new infrastructure or even like we are going to a service-oriented architecture within Pinterest as the company grew. We are sort of splitting our monolithic web app into multiple sort of microservices. And we have successfully launched a new microservice that allows us, abstracts all the functionality of our users. And we carefully did like A/B experiments to make sure that it was preserving the functionality as it was. Anyway, the conclusions for this talk are, so figure out what success means to you, and crisply define the metrics. And it's very important to figure out what those metrics are. So one of the things that we have done recently is move from optimizing monthly active users to weekly active repinners and click-throughs. And the analysis that we did was we looked at all the time spent on Pinterest. And we found out that a majority of this time spent, more than 90% of these times is being spent by the weekly active repinners and click-throughs, which means that a user is actually engaged more if he is actually in the weekly active repinners bucket, which is what we want. We want all our users to be highly engaged. So we have shifted the company-wide metric from focusing on improving monthly active users to weekly active repinners and click-throughs. So defining your metrics that you want to optimize for is very, very important. And then you automate metric computation so that you're not sort of becoming a SQL monkey all the time, sort of crunching data, and then essentially A/B test everything. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you.